Thank you for joining. Today we will discuss a lens that is quite different from any other lens in the whole wide world, but quite identical to only one other lens in the whole wide world. We're talking about Samyang AF 35-150 F2-2.8 FE. As we say in our Arabic channel, Tamron. So we're talking about Samyang AF 35-150 F2-2.8 FE, which means it is for Sony full frame. And yes, of course, we cannot start but to say that this is a replica of Tamron's very successful 35-150, the same range, the same aperture, the same performance at so many levels with small variations like we will discuss in this video. So yes, Samyang decided to replicate a very successful lens that Tamron released, and nobody can blame Samyang for that. But before we discuss this in depth and we see the minor and not so minor differences between this and the Tamron version, let's discuss the name and explain the name as we always start in our lens reviews. So Samyang is the manufacturer, also known in some countries as Rokinon. I don't believe this particular lens was released under Rokinon brand, but for many other lenses in the Samyang lineup, they release them under Samyang and under Rokinon. 35-150 is the zoom range or the focal length range, and it is just an amazing range because it starts with 35 for portraits, for environmental portraits, for events, for group photos, for landscape photos, for many of these uses. We go up to 50, street photography, portraits as well, environmental portraits to some extent, also some landscape photography, some city photography. We go up to 75 to 85 to 100 to 135. Amazing portraits, amazing videos, tight up shots, compressed shots. We reach 150 with the telephoto capabilities, with the beautiful separation, with the beautiful compression, with all these qualities of the 150 mm. So it's quite a versatile lens. It's quite a versatile lens, and much like I said about the Tamron counterpart, this is a one lens for everything that you need in an event. It might not necessarily be a one lens for everything that you need, period. It is for many things that you need, but given the size and the price and the usability and the practicality, maybe it is not something that you buy as a one lens. But if you are a wedding videographer or photographer or an event videographer or photographer, this is definitely one of the top options that you should consider before buying your set of gear. So yes, it is quite a versatile lens, and of course this is something that is built on the versatility and the success in this versatility of the Tamron counterpart. Aperture is 2 to 2.8, which means it is quite wide, and it is quite suitable for low light. And the thing with this is, similarly to what I said about the Tamron, if Tamron and Samyang decided to go with a steady 2.8 f2.8 aperture, nobody would say, oh, why didn't you go to 2? No. 2.8 is just perfect, and everybody would be happy with 2.8. But they decided to go to 2 to 2.8, so at 35 and up a little bit, we will get f2 and gradually reach f2.8 as we go to the telephoto side of the zoom range. And this is something that is quite, let me say, satisfactory. This is one extra mile that no one would have objected for not having, but it's great. It's there. It's great, and it shows that the lens manufacturer, whether the Tamron or this one, is interested in giving us something that is different from any other lens that we might have instead of this one. Lastly, FE, which means it is made for Sony full frame. And yes, it is made for Sony full frame, exactly like the Tamron counterpart. And I don't believe that there are plans to create it for other lens mounts at the moment. With the, let me call it, more flexibility shown by Canon and Nikon regarding third-party lenses on their mirrorless mounts, we might see a copy of this lens for those mounts, but for the time being, it is only for Sony E-mount. So this is about the usage, about the versatility of this lens. What about the external features, the build quality, and the design? Let's move to the top-down table and let's take a look at that. In build quality, I would say it is better than we are used to from Samyang. It feels strong. It's still plasticky, of course, but it does feel strong, maybe because of its weight, because the lens weighs 1,231 grams compared to 1,165 grams for the Tamron counterpart, which makes it pretty much similar in weight, so the weight is not a factor to choose between the two lenses. In size, this lens is 157.4 millimeters in length compared to 158 millimeters for the Tamron counterpart, which makes them almost identical. Otherwise, feels good. Feels good in the hand. The rings feel well dampened. They are good, let me say. They are not excellent by any means, but they are good. The focus ring with the gear on it is pretty impressive. I like it. I like the dampening here much better than I do with the zoom ring, although it is highly unlikely that I would put it in a rig and use follow focus gear on it, but the feel of it, and especially that it is quite different from the zoom ring, makes me happier with the focus ring. I like it. In general, we have a well-built lens. It feels hefty, it feels strong, it feels well-constructed. I have no reservations regarding the build quality. Of course, it comes with the weather sealing gasket, and according to Samyang, it is very well weather sealed from the inside as well. The lens mount is metal. We see the connectors here. Everything feels very well constructed on the lens mount side. On the front side, we have a filter thread of 82 millimeters. So it is highly likely that you will have a filter already in your bag. But if you don't, it's not very hard to find. Not very affordable though, but it's a quite common filter thread size. When it comes to features, we have two focus lock buttons, we have an AF/MF switch, and we have a custom switch that changes the behavior of rings or focus based on what we set it to do in the Samyang Lens Manager app on the computer. That's a story for a different video. If you are interested, we can perhaps do a special video on that utility. It requires having the station. We do have the station, thank you to BHM store in Dubai. They sent us the station on loan, and the lens as well, by the way. We received it from BHM store, so thanks to our friends there. Otherwise, it is a very well built lens, like I said. This lens has a minimum focusing distance of 0.33 meters. That's 33 centimeters on the wider side, so at 35 millimeters. This will give it a 0.175 magnification. That's not much, but it is not bad at all, and it is identical to the Tamron counterpart. On the longer side, at 150, it has a 0.85 meter focusing distance, which is also identical to the Tamron counterpart. Talking about autofocus, of course, autofocus has not been Samyang's strong suit for a while, but Samyang has shown great improvement in this regard, and this lens is a good example of that. There is a very, very good and consistent, to a large extent, performance of the autofocus. The thing is, with the autofocus of this lens, you need to update the firmware from when you get it. The out-of-the-box firmware is a little bit laggy, but then once you update it, you get a very, very good and consistent autofocus performance. The most important aspect of autofocus for a lens like this, given the usage of this lens for events, for wedding videography and photography, is of course human face and eye autofocus, and for those users it is doing absolutely great. It is accurate, it is consistent, it is sticky, and it is actually doing the job. So it is not enough that you see the little box around the eye. It is actually focusing on the eye, which is great. This is a great performance on Samyang's part. Can I compare it to like the 70-100 100 G Master Mark II? Absolutely not. That lens cannot compare to many lenses when it comes to how fast it is in autofocusing, but this does not say bad things about the Samyang. It is actually a very, very good lens in terms of autofocus. Comparing it to the Tamron, though, is quite interesting because the Tamron, as we know, benefits from the small share that Sony owns in the Tamron company. So they do get advantage over other third-party providers when it comes to autofocus for the Sony platform. However, comparing this one to the Tamron from memory, I can say that they are very, very close to each other in their performance. I hope to get the Tamron and to get the Samyang together and test them sharply. Maybe I'll try to do that sometime soon. But my impression from the time I used the Tamron, I tested the Tamron, and the time I tested the Samyang, that although the Tamron might have like a small edge over the Samyang, but it is not significant and it does not justify making a purchase decision based on it solely. Of course, any build quality or features or range a lens offers wouldn't matter if it fails to give us good image quality. And I'm happy to report that this lens doesn't fail in this task at all. Let's take a look at the charts. This chart was shot at 35 mm, the widest, at f2.0, which is the widest aperture as well. And as you can see, we do not have any significant distortion or vignette to talk about. We have like small hints of vignette, which is very normal at this aperture and focal length. And we have like the tiny bit of barrel distortion that can be corrected easily. Unfortunately, as you can see here, this lens still does not offer a profile in Lightroom for the correction, but I did the corrections manually, and as you can see, it straightens up really nicely with very, very minimal changes. In distortion, I added +4 only, which is like hardly anything, and in vignette +34, which is like a little bit of an overstretch. I think it would have been possible to do with less than that. I think up to 24 here we are still good. So correction is pretty simple, and I don't think that there is anything to report when it comes to distortion and vignette at this focal length. The same thing goes for 35 f2.8, 35 f4, 35 f8, which produces a really, really nice image, as you can see. We move up to 50 mm. As you can see, starting with f8, we have a beautiful photo. We work our way down to f4, f2.8, and even down at f2.2. We finally see some vignette here at f2.2 and the least bit of pincushion distortion, which is like the flattering distortion. We don't mind it at all. So basically excellent performance across the aperture range. We go up to 70, the same results. We start with f2.5, f4, f8. As you can see, we have some tiny bit of vignette here at f8, tiny bit of pincushion distortion, nothing more to report. Let's go straight up to 150. Here at f2.8, we see pronounced pincushion distortion. I wouldn't say pronounced, it's like more pronounced, a little bit more pronounced. Nothing significant, it's just the flattering pincushion distortion, nothing more. The slight bit of vignette here and there, nothing really significant. F4, we have a better performance. Go up to f8, we have an excellent image, still with a little bit of pincushion distortion. You can clearly see it here and here, but again, this is the flattering distortion, and this is normal at this focal length. Let's now move to talking about sharpness and contrast, and we also have really good news here. 35 mm f2 widest aperture. You can see here that we have, okay, let's start from the center. I skipped the center because I got used to having excellent results in the center in this lens. So at the center, we see we have really good sharpness. I wouldn't say the best sharpness ever, but really good sharpness. We see a slight drop in sharpness on the sides, but not very bad. It is reasonably good for 35 mm f2. We climb up to 2.8, still excellent in the center, but we see significant improvement on the sides. Let's see how it becomes at f4. See, it's much, much better in the corners. f8, we have an excellent image in the corner, as you can see, really good contrast and sharpness, and of course in the center it's the same result. So basically I can say that we have really good performance at 35 mm. The performance repeats itself at 50 mm. Excellent sharpness in the center, slightly washed away on the sides. Going to 2.8, it's better. F4, it's really good. F8, it's really good. And this repeats itself across the focal length. If we may go straight to 150 mm at 2.8, we see also sharpness in the center, but less so. I mean, it is good. I can say it is good, but it is not as good as it was in the other focal length. The drop in the corners becomes more pronounced. We go up to F4. Here at F4, we have much better sharpness in the center and much better sharpness and contrast on the side. So I would say at 150, start your shooting at F4. You can go to F2.8, of course, for more separation and bokeh, but you will lose a little bit of sharpness. But that's about everything negative that I can say about the optical performance of this lens, because basically it is doing just great. Let's move to talking about chromatic aberrations, and I had a hard time trying to find any. Here, if you take a look at the branches right here, you might see, I mean, if you zoom right in, this is 172%, and you might see the slight purple fringing on the sides, which is, to me, like, this is a testament for the lens, not against it. You see here that there's a little bit of purple right here, but that's at high zoom, but it is not apparent at all in the contrasty areas here. Let's try another picture here. You can see a little bit of green on this edge here and a little bit of purple here, and that's again, I mean, in a highly contrasty area. And I don't think, this is something for the lens, not against the lens. I don't suppose we have any issue with the fringing whatsoever. Like, there's the minimal regular fringing when zoomed really in. For compression, background separation, and bokeh, this lens is performing very well. It is, of course, a wide aperture lens, so we get good separation. It's also a telephoto lens at 150, so we get good separation, we get good compression, we get good bokeh. It is visually pleasing. The transition between focus and out of focus areas is gradual and nice. I find it visually pleasing in the photo samples that I took with this lens. The bokeh itself is reasonably nice, also reasonably pleasing. It is not like the best bokeh I have seen, but it is absolutely a bokeh that I want in a picture that I take. It's not at all something far from a very good bokeh ball. So in general, I can say that when it comes to separation, compression, and bokeh, this lens is performing very well. When it comes to video shooting, this is definitely a useful lens. With the range that it has, it is definitely a very helpful range. I wish it had a collar though, to be much easier to set it on a tripod, because I feel that it's very heavy for the mount. Handheld, it does just perfect, and it is very helpful because of the range, like I said. So from 35, when you're shooting groups, people talking, even establishing shots to some extent, many things that you can shoot at 35 mm, up to 50 with close-up shots for feelings, for reactions, for things like this in events, in weddings in particular. And then we go up to telephoto, where we can be far from the event that is happening and still get the facial expressions and the emotions and everything. This is a very helpful range, and the lens is performing very well in autofocus in video, so it is definitely a helpful lens in terms of video for events and weddings, and also for cinematography and professional videography. I wouldn't say it is anything for content creators or vloggers or something like that. Of course not. It's heavy, it's big, it's expensive, it's not easy to balance. Talking about balance, of course, it's not easy to balance on a gimbal. It's not made for a gimbal anyway. The range is not made for a gimbal. You could balance it, I suppose, but why would you do that with the lens this heavy and this big? To wrap up, we have a lens that has an excellent range, an excellent example to follow with the Tamron, the successful Tamron, a little bit less expensive than the Tamron, giving us a lot of the performance that the Tamron is giving us, and it is something that will help in many, many situations, especially for wedding and event photographers and videographers. So do I recommend this lens? I absolutely recommend this lens. Do I recommend it over the Tamron? I cannot say that. Just choose what suits you well. I loved the Tamron very well when I tested it, and I also love this one when I tested it. So I cannot say take one over the other, but I can say that whichever you take, you will end up with a very good lens. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe before you leave. Also, please like and share, and also follow us on our social media links below. Thank you very much. And cut.